Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Mysteries and Disappearances video. Actually, I have one more late entry to post here. When I saw this information associated with this entry, especially all the mysteriousness linked to it, I thought I would definitely showcase it here, and then we'll wrap up this playlist. This has to do with a disappearance that was international, in this case occurring there in Spain, and it was the disappearance of a young boy. But to this day, almost 40 years later after the disappearance, still people have some questions associated with it. Again, there's so much mysteriousness linked to it that it still is kept alive because of people's interest with regards to how the disappearance happened. But you're looking at a picture of the boy here, of the missing party. His name was Juan Pedro Martinez. So let's go ahead and let's talk about his disappearance here, all the factors associated with it, all the mysteriousness as well. There'll be some suggestions posted, some that I agree with too. So I'll give my own thoughts and opinions on it as well. Let me know what you guys and gals think. I'd love to hear what your own answers are with regards to what occurred to his disappearance. So here's essentially what happened. Again, you have to go back to 1986 specifically for this incident. It was there in Spain. It involved the young boy you're looking at now. His name was again Juan Pedro Martinez. He was 10 years old at the time. He was about 5 feet 4 inches, weighed about 140 pounds. He had a father by the name of Andres Martinez, and he had a mother by the name of Carmen Gomez. The way I read the information, the family, especially the father, made his living by transporting things. Some of them would be short rides, some of them would be long rides. They would be around areas of Spain, all the way to Basque areas and others beyond. His whole deal was just basically going from point A to point B, and the way the information read was that his boy, Juan Pedro Martinez, would accompany them every now and then, if not the majority of the time. And every single other experience was A-okay, except for what occurred on this fateful day and some of the strange circumstances surrounding it. That's again what leads to so much mysteriousness associated with the disappearance. But again, this all occurred on June 25th, 1986. So the father, Andres, was tasked, in this case, with transporting a very large item, 20,000 liters of sulfuric acid. He was going to take it from a place called Cartagena to another place called Bilboa. Him and the mother, Carmen, were going to go there, and then it looks like Juan Pedro, the boy, in other words, also joined as well. This was going to be a very long journey. It was going to cover a little over 500 miles. It would take about 8 hours, and most importantly, it would pass through something called the Somosierra Mountain Pass. This would involve steep, narrow mountain passes, the kind where even if you're in a vehicle like a regular car is already a dangerous situation. But here they're transporting a very, very large truck, or a very large cargo truck, in this case like an 18-wheeler. And in their case, they were going to be traversing with some very dangerous cargo as well. So this was very important. It was going to be all about safety. So what happened next, it seems to be very, very mysterious. Andres, who you would imagine, especially with him having both the wife and the son along for the ride, would be driving very carefully, but he wasn't. It was reported that he was driving very, very erratically. In fact, at certain points, he was reaching top speeds of 90 miles per hour. You could just imagine that. Here you have a situation with sharp turns, dangerous cliffs, sudden stops, short areas for the truck to traverse, other vehicles as well that are coming from another direction, either the opposite direction or following from behind. All that stuff happening with this very large truck and with the dangerous cargo. But here he was going at a very, very high speed, taking those very sharp turns as well with little regard. In some cases, people stated that he actually ran off another car off the road. It didn't sound like anyone was killed at that point. Instead, the vehicle just basically went to the side to make sure that it didn't collide with him. And in another situation, people claimed that he had clipped the mirror off of a second car. So here he was doing all this reckless driving associated with that truck, including having again the wife and the kid there, and it seemed like it didn't care to him. At a certain point whatsoever, though, the gamble fatefully went haywire, went just completely crazy, because all of a sudden the truck tipped over. It was too much, too little. Like, in other words, it was actually too much for too little luck. And in his case, the vehicle itself went towards a curve, and it was too much of a curve at the speed he was going, and the vehicle tipped over. Once that happened, it buckled upon impact. The cab of it did, and it instantly killed both the father and the mother. So it killed Andres and it killed Carmen. And as you can imagine, the vehicle speed, the impact, the weight associated with it, all of it caused the sulfuric acid to spill into the tire area, including going towards the front, in other words, the cab, and elsewhere. There were small explosions that were linked to this spillage as well. And then also there was apparently some other type of cargo there as well. More on that here in a minute that was found. But again, it ties to the mysteriousness. But all of this occurred. There was a huge spillage, the explosions, and this was all happening just in a huge crash. And when that happened, there were some witnesses that were around to look at things. But what nobody apparently saw was what happened to Juan Pedro Martinez. Instead, when investigators first came on board the scene and they started to see what had occurred, they actually checked the brakes of the truck to think maybe that was the cause of things. Maybe there was something involving the brakes actually being faulty or just completely just not working anymore. But no, they were perfectly fine. And then there was some more investigation done to see what other factors could have caused the father to be able to have that wreckage, to have that crash. But again, anything involving that is still ongoing to this day in terms of what truly occurred. Why was he driving in such a reckless manner? And ultimately, why did it lead to this crash that caused him, in other words, the father and the mother, to be killed instantly? But again, no one knew exactly what happened to Juan Pedro Martinez. In fact, at first, people didn't even know that he was there alongside the mother and the father when the crash occurred. They had just assumed that it was just the two parties that were involved that ended up becoming deceased. But afterward, once it was found out, like shortly afterward, that the boy should have been there as well, then that's when the investigation truly went into that area. They tried to find what occurred to him. In fact, there were extensive searches that were done, but ultimately no clues, no signs, no indications, nothing. Nothing really came about as to what occurred to Juan Pedro Martinez after the impact of that crash. For all intents and purposes, it was almost like he was never ever there alongside that crash once it occurred. Now, there were a few witnesses, as I was mentioning earlier, that had seen something that happened, although some of the testimony associated with these witnesses is kind of disputed to this day. It's kind of like that thing where over time, the embellishments associated with the disclaimers just grow bigger and bigger until they're nothing like the original statement. But at least if you believe this, it stated that witnesses who saw the accident claimed that shortly afterward, very shortly afterward, there was a white Nissan Vanette that ended up stopping nearby the wreckage. They didn't do anything in terms of finding out like what had happened to the people driving it or who was there. Instead, the two people that were inside the Nissan, one of them was a man, a tall man with a mustache. The other one was a younger woman. Both of them were described as Nordic looking. So in other words, they were international to that location. They had on just regular clothes as well. They claimed that they approached the truck, they looked around, and then they removed some kind of small package from the vehicle before leaving the scene. They did that in a hurry too. They were there just to basically grab that item and then leave. The witnesses stated that there was never anything involving a young boy, like in this case Juan Pedro Martinez, or anything else linked to him. The witnesses just stated that that occurred there too. And then also later on investigations showcased that the tachometer that was tied to that truck showed that there was 12 stops linked to that journey. No one knows exactly what those stops involved. Some of them were apparently very short stops. even down to the point of a few seconds. But these stops were unusual, considering that there would be no reason for the father to do so if he was truly just going from point A to point B. But something happened along the way that caused him to do those short stops. And when that happened, it may have been linked to eventually the impact, like the crash that ultimately claimed their lives. But still, people witnessed that this white Nissan Vanette may have been involved with, at one point, one of those stops, because it was almost like the father was trying to avoid or signal that vehicle as that vehicle was following them for who knows how long altogether. Now, there were some incidences afterward where, after the disappearance of the boy and nobody could find anything tied to him, not a single trace of evidence, his missing picture was actually placed in multiple areas throughout Spain. It showed his picture, it showed his information. It was something along those lines, like the kind of like the way you would see a wanted poster, but this was things associated with a missing person instead. And then that way, if anyone had any information, they knew who to contact. Well, tips started to come in, and probably the most credible one happened in May of 1987. So just about a year later, this occurred in Madrid, Spain. Apparently, there was an area there that a blind woman was entering a driving school, and then she had an Iranian status, and in her case, she was there with a young boy. The young boy appeared to be about 10 years old, and he was guiding the woman. At a certain point, the owner of that driving school was asking questions to this woman, and then he asked questions about the boy, and the woman suddenly changed the subject. But when later on, when he was shown a picture of that missing poster, the missing paper itself showcasing Juan Pedro Martinez, then that's when the person stated that it looked a lot like that boy. So that's probably the most credible version associated with the disappearance. But otherwise, the rest of it has to involve theories. So this is again where some of the stuff really stood out. The most common thing that stands out at the beginning is the fact that if the tanker that was carrying that sulfuric acid crashed and it was going everywhere, including the cab, in terms of that sulfuric acid, then maybe the boy's body was dissolved. Like maybe he was killed in that crash too, and he in turn, there was no trace of him because the sulfuric acid took care of everything. Well, as it turns out, that's false. It's been debunked because it takes a long time, days in fact, for something like that to happen. Not in the couple of hours before people are up on the scene itself and investigating things. So that's been quickly removed. Another theory was that he was kidnapped, and this could be tied to that Nissan that I was mentioning earlier. This is because apparently another sub-theory is that the father, Andres, was actually involved in drug trafficking. He was someone that was doing regular cargo, but then secretly within that cargo, he also was transporting various drugs. This is because amongst the sulfuric acid, there were trace amounts of cocaine that were found by investigators there. And again, that led them to believe that the father was transporting it, which could tie into why that Nissan was following them along this route, and why whenever the truck crashed, the only thing that they were worried about was a package of some sort, and then they left with that package. They didn't care about anything else about the crash, about the victims, or and so on. Instead, they were more worried about what was that package about and the mysteriousness, the actual contents within it, and then that was it. They were gone. So there's that theory that's associated with it too. The boy may have been an unfortunate witness to this accident, and eventually those parties, whoever it was that Andres was doing the actual drug trafficking for, came upon the scene and then took the boy with them, because they in turn did not want anyone else to have any kind of eyewitness testimony. The only problem with that theory is that none of the other witnesses that I mentioned before, again, stated that they saw the couple leave with the boy. Instead, the third theory and the fourth one kind of tie one and the other, and those are the ones that I believe as well. It stated that Juan Pedro suffered a injury, either a head trauma or something really bad to his body from that crash, and then he ended up just wandering away. It makes more sense to me because amongst all those mini explosions that were being caused by the sulfuric acid and the fire and everything else, it would have been easy for him to again have some kind of trauma that he was suffering and then just wander off and nobody would have seen him. How hard would it have been to see him from a distance with all that fire and smoke and so on? So he would have easily wandered off, traumatized. He would have gotten lost into some area out there in the woods, and then eventually in that wilderness, he would have succumbed to his injuries. And then another theory that's tied to that is that he would have gone to the nearest source of water, which would have been some kind of river, and then try to make sure that he could alleviate some of his burns. But unfortunately, with his trauma and his injuries, he was swept away from the river and then again, never ever seen. So those are the main theories that I believe in as well, where unfortunately, due to his condition, due to the impact, due to the trauma and the injuries that he had, he just ended up hopelessly getting lost somewhere out there in the wilderness and either is out there somewhere, like eventually just passed in the woods and then his body is still there to this day, or went into some search of water and then got swept away afterward. Again, it makes the most sense in this unfortunate circumstance, but that's what I think happened to this young boy. But that's pretty much it. That's all the information linked to the mysterious disappearance of Juan Pedro Martinez. He definitely joined them for the ride when it came to transporting that cargo with his mom and his dad, but nobody ever saw him afterward. And to this day, again, almost 40 years later, people are still talking about it because they're wondering what essentially occurred. And then there's the mini mysteriousness tied to the father and why he was driving so erratically with such precious cargo in terms of his family being there. And then, of course, having the rest of the other circumstances I mentioned adding to more mysterious factors. But let me know what you guys and gals think as far as this, what truly occurred to this particular incident. Let me know what your thoughts are too. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.